I'm Heather, and this is a Living with Addiction podcast, where I show you how you have more power than you realize when it comes to helping yourself and your child that's struggling with addiction. Hey, everybody. So today I'm doing something different. I'm actually recording a video of me recording the podcast audio so that I can put it on YouTube. So hopefully that works out. But I'm going to have a lot of compassion for myself if it doesn't, because that's what today's podcast about. Today, I want to talk about self-compassion, because if you're dealing with a child's addiction or any other loved one's addiction, you need to know the benefits of self-compassion and how to give that to yourself instead of only giving it to others or relying on others to give it to you. We don't ever have to manipulate or people please or sell ourselves short to get our needs met. We can meet those needs for ourselves. We spend so much of our lives searching for someone to give us some compassion. And it's wonderful to receive, but when we can give it to ourselves, there's an endless supply of it. We don't have to rely on anybody else to give us compassion, just like we don't have to rely on our kids to be sober in order for us to be happy. We get to create our own peace of mind in every situation. And that's total empowerment in a situation that can make you feel very powerless. I spend so much time reminding my clients to have their own back and have compassion for themselves, because for some reason, when life gets really hard, we tend to get even harder on ourselves, and that's never helpful. We're in enough pain already. We don't need to add to it. I looked up self-compassion when I was researching for this podcast, but I didn't find like an actual dictionary definition. But I love this explanation that I found. It's the ability to turn understanding, love, and acceptance inward. So think about how often you extend compassion to others, but do you give it to yourself? The thought of giving yourself love and compassion might sound awkward or weird to you. It's felt that way to me before, but I'd like to point out that you're already feeling awkward. You're in an awkward situation dealing with your child's addiction. So let's call it discomfort instead of awkward. And you know that I choose that word a lot. I even have a podcast episode just about discomfort, because tolerating discomfort is a superpower. I heard somebody say the other day, and I loved it, that the person who loses is the one who gives into discomfort first. And I thought about how often do we give into discomfort because of our child's addiction, and how yucky it feels when we take action from that space of giving into discomfort. We just create a whole new discomfort for ourselves, trying to relieve the initial discomfort. So tolerating it is very important. And you're in discomfort right now because things aren't working how you want them to. It's a struggle to try to figure out how to handle things with your child's addiction. Your relationship is probably strained. And I just want to remind you that all change involves discomfort. So the change of giving yourself love and compassion is just another form of discomfort. But this discomfort can unlock a new future for you. People always ask me how I was able to learn and grow and understand things so fast when it came to my daughter's addiction, like once I started working on it in the right direction. And I believe a huge part of that is one, my self-compassion, two, that I actually go out and do the work. I don't just passively consume things. I digest them and make them my own. And that self-compassion, I'm good at creating a safe place for myself to fully see the truth of who I am, even when it's not flattering. So that means when I'm witnessing my own behavior, I try to avoid judgment and labeling it as good or bad. I'm just a curious witness. And I'm human, so occasionally I still judge myself, but I redirect. Overall, I was able to have breakthroughs really fast when I first started working with my coach because I didn't beat myself up when I saw the truth of myself. It was disappointing, and it was hard to see how my actions had unintentionally created a lot of results in my life that were causing me a lot of pain. I was in a deteriorating marriage because my husband had had multiple affairs. My daughter was struggling with her addiction. I was heavier than I'd ever been in my life, even heavier than I was when I was 9 months pregnant with my daughter. And I just felt completely lost. I started working with my coach because of her weight loss tools were different than anything that I had ever seen before. And it made sense to me that in order to make permanent change in my life, I had to change my whole relationship and beliefs and thoughts about eating and health. And as I was learning those tools and applying them in my life, I started seeing how I could apply them to my daughter's addiction and other areas of my life where I was unhappy. And I look at self-compassion like opening a door to all the possibilities. And I look at harsh criticism like slamming the door in the face of all of those possibilities. It just closes you off. So I want you to ask yourself, like, what does your inner dialogue sound like? If all of your thoughts about yourself were on a billboard in your yard, would you be more motivated to change them? Like, just picture that and think about your thoughts just scrolling across that billboard and anybody being able to read them. Like, how motivated would you be to change those thoughts you were thinking about yourself? And when, we're in a challenging life situation, like a child's addiction, it's really easy to get critical of ourselves. We feel like we failed as parents. Our internal dialogue can get brutal. And self-criticism is strongly correlated with depression and dissatisfaction in life. And which makes sense because the thoughts that we think release the chemicals that we feel in our body as emotions or feelings. So if we're thinking critical and negative thoughts about ourselves, then we're going to be experiencing those emotions and stuck in them instead of thinking thoughts that allow us to either rise above our situation or work through it. And thinking about those self-critical thoughts, I want you to think back to your childhood and ask yourself, did you have a critical adult in your life when you were growing up? If you did, then I want you to ask yourself if you've just carried on the things that they used to say to you. Is that what your inner dialogue sounds like? Does it sound familiar? Does it come from that person? I want you to really think about those questions and answer them for yourself, because it could be the most compassionate thing that you do for yourself. We all crave connection and we want more of it. Self-compassion creates connection. When you open your heart to yourself and change your life, you will be so much more available to connection with everybody else in your life. This is a really important part of developing your relationship with yourself. Your relationship with yourself is the most important relationship. It sets the tone for all your other relationships. Self-compassion helps you relate to yourself and others in a much healthier way. On last week's episode, I talked about post-traumatic growth. And part of my post-traumatic growth came from showing myself great compassion, as I said earlier, and releasing judgments and replacing them with acceptance of the reality of the situation that I was in. It was acceptance for my daughter and who she was in that moment instead of trying to make her somebody else. An acceptance for who I was and loving myself as I was, even though I still wanted to improve myself, I could still love myself as I was in that moment and want to make changes from a place of love. There was a point I had to own that I wasn't the mother that I wanted to be because I was a person who preferred numbness over feeling. I never taught my daughter self-compassion. I taught her to suck it up, move on, no whining, no pouting, no emotions, unless I thought it was like an emotional situation, which wasn't often, but I wasn't completely heartless and cold, but I also wasn't like touchy-feely either. I, looked at a lot of emotions as just nonsense. My daughter was naturally compassionate towards others and especially animals. And she had the kindest heart. And there were times like from her, when she was in her active addiction, she'd pretty much lost everything. She hardly even had any clothes. But if she saw somebody who was less fortunate than her and didn't have clothes, she would just give them hers and figure out how to get more because she was just is even still that kind of person. But I don't think she had a lot of self-compassion because I know before her addiction started, her inner critic got really loud and ugly. And she didn't have the tools to manage it. So she just turned to so many different forms of self-harm. And I'm a different mom today, but I have to have compassion for myself that I wasn't the kind of mother who taught my daughter to have compassion for herself and that she went through that. I share with her now the things that I do for myself, but of course, I wish I could have taught her those things from when she was little. And one of the worst things about our kids' addiction initially is the blame we put on ourselves. I spent endless hours trying to figure out where I went wrong with my daughter. And part of the reason for that was I thought that if I could figure out where I went wrong, I could help her. And if there's somewhere you went wrong, it's important to own that. But it's also important not to put yourself in front of the firing squad for it. If there's something that you can do to repair the situation, then focus on what you can do moving forward to fix it instead of what you did wrong in the past. And for me, I had to own a lot. I had to get super vulnerable and admit so many things to my daughter. I had to see myself. And at first, it was painful to see, but really looking at myself helped me to see how I was like my daughter instead of being so focused on how we were different. And when I had true compassion, instead of judging my daughter and labeling her addiction as bad, I was able to have gratitude that it wasn't me. I was able to see that under different circumstances, it could have been me. I've flirted with addiction. I spent years over drinking and abused some substances. But for some reason, I was always too scared to try most of the hard stuff. And consequences eventually made me quit or change. I didn't have to have that bad of consequences. I just had to have the fear of worse consequences in order to change. And that's not because I'm superior, it's because I'm different. It could have been me if I had just somehow been born slightly different, or if I had made different decisions. I could have drank until I crossed that line into addiction. Compassion's not just for people who are blameless victims of situations, but it's also for those of us who have failed and experienced personal weakness and made bad decisions. Compassion involves recognizing our shared human condition. You hear me say a lot, we're just humans. I'm just a human. And it's a reminder that we're all flawed. And because of our flaws, we cause ourselves a lot of suffering. Compassion for yourself really eases that suffering. And in case you confuse compassion with self-pity, I want to remove the confusion because compassion is productive and nurturing, but self-pity is unproductive. It sounds like nobody likes me, comparing, why me? Life sucks, poor me. It's this childlike emotional immaturity. Compassion is emotional adulthood and responsibility. It comes from a place of wanting health and well-being. Self-pity keeps you stuck in the same while making excuses. It separates and it isolates you. Self-compassion is a powerful way to achieve emotional well-being and contentment in our lives. By giving ourselves unconditional kindness and comfort while embracing the human experience, we avoid the destructive patterns of fear and negativity and isolation. And I have to share that breast cancer has pushed me so much farther into self-compassion than I've ever gone. And I believe that's why I'm so happy and content in my life right now. Even though I'm living with the results of a failed reconstruction after a double mastectomy, I'm facing many more surgeries when I attempt reconstruction again. I already know the physical pain that I'm going to experience with those surgeries and the limitations. And I know that there's a possibility that it won't work again. And I give myself a ton of compassion for that. I'm really intentional with how I think about that area of my body, how I talk to myself about it. Because after my second surgery, I caught myself thinking of it as a train wreck. And as soon as I caught myself thinking that, I changed it. I thought, like, there is no way I'm going to do that to myself. Just no. So for a while, I thought of it as my reconstruction zone because that was all that I could think of. That was the most compassionate thing I could come up with. Now it's just my chest again. And Tuesday, earlier this week, I got coaching just on my thoughts about my body that has been drastically changed in each of the 3 surgeries I had in June and July. I mean, it's very disorienting to look so different so quickly. And I have a ton of compassion for myself for that. I allow my grief. I cry, I vent, but I also keep it in perspective. I am not going to allow this to hold me back from anything that I want. I remind myself that my life will be as fulfilling and as happy as I allow it to be, with or without breasts. And in the 2 weeks before my double mastectomy, there was only one way to relieve my anxiety in a healthy way. Like none of my normal go-tos worked. My counselor told me to love the part of me that was scared. And I'm sure that I snarled at first and thought, are you kidding me? But I did it. And I just kept loving and having compassion for the part of me that was scared. And I would stop and put my left hand on my heart and my right hand on my solar plexus, and I would focus on breathing. And I would breathe really deeply in and out. And I would practice sending love from my heart all the way through my hands and into my body. And I would say out loud to myself, I love the part of me that's scared right now. I love the part of me that wants to protect me from having this surgery. I love the part of me that's causing anxiety. And I would breathe into whatever part of my body I was feeling that anxiety in until it dissipated. And that's why 1 minute I could be in total fear and anxiety, and I could stop and give myself some love and compassion. And then the next minute, I could be having a big laugh with a family member or a friend. I didn't have to isolate or hide. Self-compassion allows us to flourish even in hard times. I mean, think about that, flourishing in hard times. It helps us keep perspective and discernment. We can see the good things in our life and not just the bad. And all of that created connection for me instead of isolation. Giving myself love and compassion made it so I could be around other people during this time where I felt completely naked and vulnerable. Some days I only had to do that exercise once. Other days I had to do it over and over and over all day. It is the most compassion I've ever given myself, and it keeps me moving forward each day. It was productive and healthy. I was being an emotional adult by meeting my needs for safety and reassurance. I mean, can you imagine if I was running around trying to get that from everybody all day? I would have been a needy, creepy, weird mess. People would have been running for me. Nobody would have wanted to be around me. But I was able to give myself this gift because I was willing to try something that initially sounded weird to me and felt awkward and ended up being incredibly reassuring and helped me create a sense of safety for myself in a situation that I didn't feel safe. And it's the same thing with our kids' addiction. It creates this sense that we are not safe and we need to be able to create our own safety. We cannot look outside of ourselves for it. Otherwise, we are completely powerless. So here's a few questions that I want you to ask yourself to assess where your self-compassion is and how you can make some changes. Where in your life could you use more self-compassion? What stops you from giving that compassion to yourself? Because you're the one who is stopping you if you won't do it. It's not that you can't, it's that you won't. Do you give others more compassion than you give to yourself? What do you wish other people would do for you that you can do for yourself? When challenges show up in your life, do you ignore your suffering and focus exclusively on fixing the problem? Or do you stop and give yourself care and comfort? Which, by the way, when we try to bypass our suffering and the challenge that we're experiencing and quickly change how we feel, then we miss the opportunity to develop the capacity to process our emotions, and we always have to be running from them. Instead, you can be moving towards what you want instead of running away from what you don't want. It's a totally different energy. Do you get carried away by the drama of difficult situations and make a bigger deal out of them than you need to? Do you tend to feel cut off from others when things go wrong? Do you have irrational feelings that everyone else, so it's like compare and despair, is having a better time than you? Or do you try to remember that everybody experiences hardship? It's just part of our humanness. Are you criticizing yourself for your lack of self compassion? Do you know anyone who is a great example of compassionate behavior? Sometimes it really helps to think about what that person would do. People often tell me that they ask themselves what I would do in a situation when it comes to dealing with their kids' addiction. And I do that a lot when it comes to business. My mentor's name is Brooke. So I often wonder, like, what would Brooke do in this situation? And I embody my inner Brooke. The answers are still coming from me, but it's a way to trick my brain into believing that I can do something until I build that belief in myself. And that's what people do when they're asking themselves what I would do. They're borrowing their belief in me until they can build that belief in themselves. So I think that's a really great trick to try. So find somebody who is an, example of self-compassion so you can follow their example. Another thing is when I want to learn something new, I totally immerse myself in it until I understand it. So find people on social media to follow who embody self-compassion, listen to podcasts about it, watch YouTube videos, read books about it. There's also a website called selfcompassion.org, and it's got a ton of free information on it from Kristen Neff, who she seems to be the go-to person on self-compassion. So I highly recommend you check out that website because if you're not into reading books, there's a lot of short like blogs on there that you can read. So I want to close with a few more perspectives about self-compassion. I want you to start seeing it as powerful. It's so powerful because it's one of the things that you can control in this life. Powerful self-compassion leads to powerful thoughts. I've shared how our thoughts create our feelings and affect the chemicals in our body. Healthy, powerful thoughts contribute to a healthy mind and body. It doesn't matter how good you eat or how much you exercise or how many vitamins you take, you can't overcome the damage caused by constant negative thoughts. Self-kindness actually releases oxytocin, which is often called the hormone of love and bonding. And those increased levels of oxytocin lead to increased feelings of trust and calm and safety and generosity and connectedness. It reduces the fear and anxiety that we feel about our kids or other situations. All of the rising numbers of COVID right now, it's a great time to offer yourself self-compassion if you have a lot of fear about that. It counteracts the increased blood pressure and cortisol that is associated with stress. Our thoughts and feelings have the same effect on our bodies, whether they're about ourselves or somebody else. So if you're thinking negative thoughts about somebody else, or you're thinking negative thoughts about you, your body doesn't know the difference. It's still releasing those same chemicals. So when you attack yourself emotionally, you set off your own fight or flight response. And again, this sends adrenaline and cortisol shooting through your body. And over time, if you're constantly doing that to yourself, it can lead to depression because it depletes the neurotransmitters that help you experience the pleasurable emotions. And your child's addiction can stimulate your fight or flight response on its own. It creates this keen awareness to a lack of safety and how vulnerable we are in danger. So when you start attacking yourself on top of that and backing yourself in a corner with ugly, mean, nasty thoughts, you just further deplete your system of the ability to experience joy. And this is the underlying theme for most parents who love somebody with an addiction or love anybody with an addiction, not just parents. They get stuck right there. So I want you to think of self-compassion as your ticket out of misery and suffering. You can soothe yourself and create a sense of safety for yourself instead of adding to the assault. Like you're like teaming up with the addiction and battling against yourself instead of creating a totally different environment where you can feel safe. It is possible to feel safe, even in the circumstance of addiction. So this will also lead to better results in your life because you'll be taking actions from a place of self-compassion instead of panic and fear. We never want to take actions from panic and fear. We create the best results in our lives by taking actions that are driven by powerful thoughts that serve us, thoughts that are intentional. I want you to take the time to answer the questions that I asked you earlier. You're going to listen to this episode and think, yes, I need more self-compassion. My commitment to it is going to pump you up about it. But then if you don't commit to yourself and do the work, that sense of knowing that self-compassion will help you will slowly fade, and you won't change if you don't do anything about it. You will have passively consumed this transformational information and then skip the transformation. So put this to use in your life. And if you want to take your transformational work to the next level, then you can sign up for a call with me by using the link in the show notes. And that's all I have for you today. I hope you have a great rest of the day and a great weekend. Thank you for listening to this episode. If you want to learn more about my work, go to heatherrosscoaching.com. If you want to help other parents who are struggling with a child's addiction, you can do it two different ways. First, you can share the podcast with them directly, or you can share it on your social media. Second, you can leave a review. Talk to you next week.